Hello, everybody. This is the first episode of a new podcast, and it's called Crossing Strings and Stories. It's all about braiding rawhide and rawhide braiders and people that use the gear. And I'm honored to be the first guest.
Awesome. All right. I'm just curious, where were you born? Where were you born and raised?
Well, I was born and raised in a small rural town in Belgium, about, say, half hour northeast and half hour southeast of Antwerp.
Okay.
Two cities that probably everybody in the world heard about, but
okay,
that's where I was born. Yeah.
And then when did you start riding?
Well, I started riding very late. I think I was 18 before I started riding a horse, because back then in the small town in rural Belgium on the countryside, horses were mainly work animals.
Mm-hmm.
One. Two, the other thing that was very important is that we were, I come from a middle class family, and my dad was a civil servant and my mom was a housewife. And, my dad used to say, riding horses is for rich people. So I got into it pretty late. Yeah.
Yeah. I in the 90s lived in Germany for a while, and I think I saw one Western saddle. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, see, for me personally, well, as a matter of fact, when my dad died and my mom went to a service home, we're making their house empty, and I find a folder with all kinds of drawings that I did as a kid. And I couldn't write back then, but I was pretty good in drawing stuff. And my dad would date every drawing that I made and put my name on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I found drawings from when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, and everything on it is horses, cowboys, and the occasional Indian.
Mm-hmm.
Reason being, I guess, because back in those days, on TV, we had those matinees on Saturday and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's just like in the US, but there were a lot of old Westerns and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I kind of grew up with like Roy Rogers and Hopalong Cassidy and John Wayne, and back then the black and white movies. So, yeah. So that's kind of where it comes for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the late 70s, 80s, there was a big amusement park about 20 minutes from where we lived. And it had kind of like a Western theme on it.
Mm-hmm.
But back then, there was a legendary guy from the U.S., legendary for us, Alan Jacob. And Alan Jacob had a rodeo company, and he toured Europe to all the U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force bases in Europe. And, he would add a couple of months in that amusement park with the rodeo. So there was a guy from town next to us that rodeoed there. And he started like a riding school, or, and he, of course, got into the whole Western scene, and there I got the first buck. And of course, as a young kid, I wanted to ride bucking horses too. And after my second bareback bronc, I got hurt pretty bad. I thought, pickup man might be a better idea. And then once you get into that, you want to make sure that you can bring that pickup horse close to that bronc, stay safe. So you got to have that pickup horse really good under control.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to know one of the pioneers of the whole deal here in Europe and in Belgium. And went from there, never looked back.
Yeah. So, because I'm kind of a newbie in this area, what is your specific discipline of horsemanship?
Well, my first love was the cow horse.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to ride with one of those pioneers that was primarily into the cow horse and the reining. because that would give me a really good foundation to work on a horse in order to get a better pickup horse. But then, of course, doing the pickup horses, it was getting a little boring, and the reining was fun. But my first love has always been the cow horse.
Mhm.
But I've been training horses for the public since the mid 80s
Mhm.
up until 2013, and people brought me nothing but reining horses.
Hmm.
And for 10 years, I didn't show because I had a problem keeping my nerves under control.
Mhm.
And so I didn't like showing, you know. But I liked working the horses. And then for 10 years, I did a lot of problem solving,
Mhm.
break calls, and if there were any horses that people had issues with, at trying to find a way to get them to do stuff.
Mhm.
And of course, back then, the name Pet Pirelli started to ring a bell over here.
Mhm.
But I got most of the deals from guys like Ray Hunt that used to do clinics in Germany early on, and
Mhm.
so that's kind of where it started.
Okay. How does that connect to the rawhide?
Well, in the mid '80s, I really liked the look of rawhide gear, and
Mhm.
I really liked the Rommel reins, and I really liked the Bosel, and whatever was available in Europe, which was very little, but whatever was available, I couldn't afford it back then.
Yeah.
So I had another friend, and then we got together like every Tuesday night, either at my house or at his house, and we just screw around with leather at first, and then later on, some rawhide, and go from there. And then I did a lot in leather. I used to do a lot in leather,
Mhm.
and then I started working rawhide probably around 2005 or something.
Okay.
And I started doing the rawhide because I couldn't afford it at first, but I kept doing it because I loved doing it.
Yeah. So is it traditional at all in Europe?
Well, it originated in Europe. What you guys do
Mhm.
on the cowboy gear, if we go down to Spain, you
Right.
know, or even southern France, we can find some braided stuff. Now,
Mhm.
over there, it's mostly in leather, not rawhide. And I do think the whole rawhide scene, even the Moorish in northern Africa have a lot of braided stuff. Uh, but I think why rawhide became the medium to braid in the US was mainly because it was freely available on the ranch.
Yeah.
You find a dead cow, just take the hide off, flesh it, scrape the hair off, cut it in a string, and you can start braiding stuff. And it's readily available and it's free.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the whole rawhide braiding scene or gear originated more from that than anything else.
Mhm. So where did you learn rawhide instead of leather?
Well, there was this leather shop, and they started carrying rawhide strings, but they were not beveled, they were not split uniformly, so it was a disaster. And then in Germany, we got this, for a long time. I don't know if it still is, but for a long time, Equitana in Essen, Germany, used to be the oldest and the largest horse fair in the world.
Mhm.
And back in the day, AQHA would have a booth there, and APHA would have a booth
Mhm.
there. Western Horseman magazine used to have a booth there, and some other guys. But I ran into a guy that was having his booth together with another shop or something. I can't remember. By the name of Albert Frunz, which most of us know as Bertie Frunz. And I remember I bought some cores, Bosell cores off him there that he had with him, and he showed me the importance of splitting
Mm-hmm.
and then of course it's all back to the old Bruce Grand books, and you go deeper in it and you start experimenting and making some own tools, and then later on in 2014 I it wasn't I think in 2012 that one of my daughters went to Japan for a year to study at Fukuoka Women's University. Said that you got to go on Facebook. Well, I don't have time for all that crap. Yeah, well, you got to do it. Just we can exchange stories and pictures, and it's free.
Mm-hmm.
You go, now you're talking my language, and so I get on Facebook, and I get on some pages that have to do with rawhide and stuff, and I learned an awful lot about it. And then in 14, I thought, oh, what the heck? And I just posted, guys, I'm going to be in Oklahoma first for the AQHA World Show in Oklahoma City. Then I'm going to be a couple of days in the Gainesville, Texas area. And then I'm going to go back to Oklahoma City. But I'd like to meet as many braiders as I can and pick y'all's brain. And the first guy that reacted to it was the late Len Newell.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to chatting about it. And then I think it was Brent Callahan. And really early on, all of a sudden, here comes a guy that I knew already, but I was afraid to speak to because the man is a living legend in my circles,
Mm-hmm.
reining horse circles, quarter horse, paint horse. Clint Haverty reacted, why don't we all get together in my shop? So we decide on a Sunday to be at Clint Haverty's shop in Crum, Texas. And Saturday it starts to snow. Now there's about a half-inch of snow on the ground in Texas, but the state shuts down over there, right? Yet Len Newell showed up, and back then he lived in Oklahoma. Of course, Clint was there. Brent Callahan, who used to live near Crum then, showed up. Pete May, also from Crum, showed up. Enrique Capone, he came from Garland, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
He showed up. And Brendan Anthony, who's now really making a big name for himself as a bit spur maker. And so with the seven of us, we had the most interesting day and, went for supper later that night and decided we got to do this again.
Mm-hmm.
And then Clint got the support from Sonny Miller from the National Roper Supply in Decatur, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And so ever since 2015, we've been doing it there, and it's been awesome. And if you see work from me, and I can only talk for myself, all right, but if you look at work that I did before 14 and after 14, you see an enormous quality gap right there.
Yeah.
So
what was your goal when you started?
Make stuff I couldn't afford.
Yeah. And
then and then I was able to do it. Now can I do it better?
Mm-hmm.
Because
so is that your goal now?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And not only that, but I've never taken orders for rawhide gear.
Mm-hmm.
I started out trying to make stuff for myself, and I'm still making stuff for myself. That being said, when I go to a horse show, chances are I leave for a horse show with gear, and I come back from the horse show and I got to start braiding again because people just bought it off
Right.
of my horse, so to speak.
Right.
So that's how it's been going on. And
Mm-hmm.
then later with Facebook, there are, whenever I post something, there are people that are relentless
Mm-hmm.
in their effort on private messenger where, finally you go like, oh, what the hell, I'll sell it to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would you say the greatest challenge you've faced braiding is?
The first greatest challenge was to learn to make a good string. And the second major challenge for me was to find the right temper and how to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you can make a good string and you can get a good temper in your string, from then on, it's not all that difficult. But you got to start from a well-tempered, really good string.
Mm-hmm.
Like your splitting needs to be right, your cut needs to be right, your beveling needs to be right. And then, like now, what I do a lot is, something comes up in my mind, and then I try to figure out a way how to do it. But the other thing is that with conversations I had with other braiders, it's like a couple of years ago, Billy Albin tells me, I quit taking orders too. He goes, what? He said, yeah. He says, now whatever hide I get, I let the hide tell me what it wants to be.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it gives me room to experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple of years ago, there was a whole year where Billy experimented with all kinds of Hondas for ropes. And he came up with like really neat new things that no one has ever seen before. And if you look at it, you go like, how the heck did he do that? And I still don't know, but I mean, that's the fun of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I get that freedom, and Billy took that freedom just to come up with weird stuff. And whatever I post is a fraction of what I do, because you try something where you go like, maybe it can work that way, and it doesn't. And you just throw it in the trash, or you go like, it's not what I hoped it would be, and you
Yeah.
throw it away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What other media have you worked with?
Well, I do a little leather tooling.
Okay.
And I tried to get kind of good in the Sheridan style flower tooling.
Okay.
That's what I do most of all. Of course, I mean, as far as the design goes, I'm no Clint Haverty. That man just. I remember Clint was judging the European reining fraternity, and I'm showing. And my daughter is scribing for Clint Haverty at the show.
Mm-hmm.
She says, Dad, he's just sitting there when he's got a moment off, and he's got like a napkin or whatever, and he takes a pen and he just, all those flowers to
Mm-hmm.
tool leather and designs, they just come out of his hand. I don't know how that happens, but for me, it's like a thought process, and I got to go there, and he just sits there and he just cranks it out.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I call talent, I guess. But no, I like working leather, but I like braiding rawhide more.
Yeah. What's your favorite piece to make?
I think I have, over the years, I have made more headstalls than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being, with from the early 80s till 2013, having all these reining horses in training, the rawhide headstone was pretty much the only type of rawhide gear that I could use to show off.
Yeah.
But I think if whatever you do, I like to do it all. There's a couple of things I don't like doing because I don't have the stamina or the physique for it. Like braiding a riata, I've done one and I'm very proud of it. That sucker is not for sale because I don't want to work another one. Because I was afraid after a while I didn't have any skin left on my hands and my arms were going to fall off.
Yeah.
And another thing is that I did was a rawhide braided martingale, like a breast collar kind of
Mm-hmm.
deal.
Mm-hmm.
And it forced me to put buttons, to bring it all together,
Right.
to put buttons in places where I didn't think it was possible, but it needed to be there. And I got it done, but I'm thinking that SOB is going on the wall. I don't want it to get dirty, and I never want to do it again.
Yeah.
But I think to make a good set of reins is a challenge in itself, but so is a good hackamore and a good headstall. And once you've made enough of them, you kind of got the dynamics down, and then you can start thinking about other stuff that's uh, inherently important, you know, like the feel in your reins, the length in your reins. Um, I make reins that I'm going to show horses with different than reins that I'm going to use on the ranch, because when I use them on the ranch, I also may have to rope or whatever, and then I want a shorter rein with a palm concho because I got small hands. And if I got all the coils of a 60-foot rope
Mm-hmm.
and Rommel reins and maybe the Rommel in there, then it's
Too
not
much.
going to work for me. So I just want to have that palm concho here in my hand, and it stays there. And I did the math to know how long that rein needs to be for me and my style of riding,
Mm-hmm.
and how long those chains need to be, and then I can go from there. But if I want to go show, I want a little longer rein,
Mm-hmm.
because show and horses, the word says it himself, you can't show horses and win anything if you don't show off, right?
Yeah.
So you want to do that on a looser rein. And me personally, like if I would show a reiner in a Rommel rein, like I normally wouldn't do that, you know,
Right.
I'm so used to showing reiners in split reins.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say I got a horse that's really good in a certain bridle bit, and those rings are too small, where you put your chain on,
Mm-hmm.
or your rawhide rein, and that ring is too small to put a split rein on. Then I do use a Rommel rein, but I don't use rein chains in a reining or in the hurt work of a cow horse.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the dry work for the cow horse, you show a cow horse a little different than you show a reiner, especially in your rein contact. Uh, so a lot of reiners, you want a circle, and a lot of judges like to see it where you got a nice drape in your reins,
Mm-hmm.
in your circles, and you can really stop your horse off of your seat and on a loose rein, and he'll bury his butt. In the cow horse, that's a little different. Um, Reining is all about form.
Mm-hmm.
Cutting is all about form. In the cow horse, for the dry work or for the hurt work, it's not just form, it's form to function.
Mm-hmm.
So that horse that slides 20 feet, I don't like to have that in a cow horse, because if I'm sliding 20 feet on a long rein, my horse, the cow, is going to be out the other way,
Right.
and I'm going to collect at least one penalty point
Right.
for losing a horse's length past that cow.
Mm-hmm.
And if he slides 30 feet, I get 2 1-point penalties for
Mm-hmm.
that same stuff. So that is kind of why I use all that different stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, I can afford it, because all I need to do is get hold of some rawhide, and then I'll make whatever I want to make.
Is that breast collar behind you?
Yes, ma'am.
Would you show that off? I'm curious.
Yep. I'll take it for you. Put my earplugs back in. This is it.
Wow.
So here on the top, you can adjust length if you want to, and then goes
Mm-hmm.
around the horse's neck. This heart-shaped medallion is in the middle of his breast,
Mm-hmm.
and this goes back to your cinch.
Hmm.
But when you're putting it together, especially this button was a nightmare,
Yeah.
because you don't have really good access to that button, especially not if you're putting your interweaves like
Right.
right in here.
Right.
And then of course, because I didn't, what I would do now is I would first do these buttons
Mm-hmm.
and then bring it together.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't do that. So
Yeah.
not only was this a nightmare, but each of these was a nightmare too.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So,
So that leads me.
and
Go ahead.
the idea I got from this was from a visit to the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City. There's one kind of like that, more elaborate, far better braided by Luis Ortega.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of what got me on that idea.
So my next question I have is there a particular piece that stands out in your memory as special? I think we talked about that one, but is there another one?
You mean one that I made myself?
Yeah.
Well, if we go to work I've done lately, I am, let me get this back in. I am very proud of this quirt. And reason being, I think this may be the best quirt I've ever done. Plus, I came up with an idea here that I had not seen before.
Mm-hmm.
So, what you usually have in a California style quirt is that you make your handle and then you go through the braid, you kind of push the braids
Right.
aside to make your wrist loop. But then I came up with this, and as far as the buttons go, and even attention to detail, like right here,
Mm-hmm.
I put a letter plug in there to just, make it a little.
Yeah.
So I'm really proud of this quirt.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, something else I'm real proud of is this twisted riata.
Mm-hmm.
And the first riata that I did was a braided riata that ended up to be like 82 feet, where this one, the twisted one, is I ended up with, I believe, 53 feet of it. But I hear that at the Utah gathering, they tried twisting one, and it was a huge learning curve for them, and it was a huge learning curve for us. Because I got a friend here who is in the nautical world.
Mm-hmm.
He is like, braiding with cord and rope and all that stuff, and he is the man to talk to, and he became a great friend. He is a walking encyclopedia of knots and braids
Mm-hmm.
and what have you. His name is Jan Boogaerts, and he got me in touch with another guy from Belgium that's also in that nautical braiding world. And this guy made a rope twister that supposedly is the Cadillac of all rope twisters. And the reason being, everything runs on ball bearings and everything is so smooth and what have you. So I know a little rawhide, and he knows how to twist, and Kid knows a little bit of both, and we decided to twist. And of course, I checked with my friend Bill Black, and I checked with Randy Roberts, and Randy, he provided me with the string and how he figured out it needed to be cut, because he was at that rawhiders gathering in Woodruff, Utah. And so we started off, and those strings were 110 feet long to start off with. And the first couple of hours, it's bing, bing, bing. But I was fortunate. It was always like near to one end.
Mm-hmm.
So then we kind of figured it out, what was important and what didn't work and what worked. And So after about 3 or 4 hours of trying stuff and applying more soap and taking a little bit soap off and all that, we kind of came to that result. And I gotta give credit to everybody that has ever helped me with rawhide braiding, but especially Randy, because whatever I ask Randy, Randy can do. You know, if you want to have something like, hey, I want a 2-year-old longhorn heifer hide, he'll make sure he finds a 2-year-old heifer hide, and he'll prepare it in a way that I can't prepare it myself. So, and then you've got strength from there, but like also Bill Black, and of course we got the time difference between Europe and the U.S.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to do the old man walk around 2 in the morning. So that was going to be for us like say 8 hours later. So we work, and he says, if you got any questions, give me a call. And he stayed, you know, so I could always call him, but fortunately I didn't have to. We could figure it out. But I mean, that is the rawhide family in short. Here's a guy that has been doing it for a while, who has experience in it, and he says it'll be in the middle of the night, but I'll have my phone with you or with me, and whenever you have a question and you can't work it out, just give me a call.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And that's how, you know, my braider family is.
Yeah.
And guess what? I never met Bill in person.
Oh, really?
But we, you know, we chat a lot on Messenger, and once in a while we call and have a video call, and you know, but you know, and all the other guys like Nate Walt and Pablo Lozano. I mean, 2 grandmasters of the craft, and they come to the gathering. And the one thing that struck me the most is, like, say you're at Equitana, or you're on the World Equestrian Games. It's, you got the reiners and you got the show jumpers, you know, and there's always a little animosity.
Yeah.
In the cowboy world, you got the horse show guys, and you got the cowboy guys, and then you got the non-equestrians. But ever since we had the first gathering, there was never any condescendence from one group to another. You know, I remember 2015, the first time we did it in the NRS indicator. There were about 30 people there, and there were ranch cowboys, and there were horse show guys, and there were saddle makers, and there was whatever, you know. And the atmosphere was so friendly. The camaraderie was there. Maybe it was just because we had that common threat being rawhide and braiding,
and maybe the art,
who knows. But I mean, that's just how it is, you know. I can ask any of those guys, and if someone does ask me something, I try always to give an answer if I have an answer. And if I don't have an answer, I'll just say, hey, listen, I don't have any experience with this, or I've never done this, but I know that guy that does it, so get in touch with him.
Yeah. So that leads perfectly to the next question, I think. What's the best way to educate the public on quality rawhide, but also quality rawhide equipment?
Well, in 2015, Tracy Willis was at the gathering. And Tracy Willis, I think for the past 3 decades, has been equipment judge at the Quarter Horse Congress in Columbus, Ohio, and at the AQHA World Show in Oklahoma City. And Tracy said, you know, I see very few rawhide pieces that I think are really good, and I see a lot of dog chews.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the rawhiders gathering page on Facebook, we are making a dent in it.
Mm-hmm.
We're over 17K members now.
Yeah.
And there's some reactions coming in from non-members. And I'm just saying, if you want to react on any post on the rawhider gathering, make sure you become a member first,
Mm-hmm.
and you press agree to the conditions,
Mm-hmm.
because we get about 40 requests a day. And then between Clint Heverty and myself, we said, here's what, I don't care what the content is. And I mean, it's from scammers to downright
Right.
porn that they
Right.
try to get up on a big group like that. But if somebody did not hit the agree button, we're not gonna let it onto the group.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then sometimes, you know, some scammers kind of get through.
Yeah.
And there's always that guy that agrees and then wants to start selling knives or some other crap. But,
Right. Right.
but that
How do we recognize someone's efforts and still give critical analysis, especially in that group?
well, to me, I don't think I ever got where I am by getting sunshine blown up my butt. I believe that just pointing out an issue
Mm-hmm.
is not the right way.
Mm-hmm.
If I point out an issue, I will also give what I think is the solution.
Mm-hmm.
But for years, when I was going to Southeast Germany for horse shows, on my way up or my way back, I passed by Betty Frunz's house. And that brings some of the stuff that I lately made. There's one thing I learned from Betty. Betty never overloaded my boat.
Mm-hmm.
Betty would say, hey, see this? I can see that this is where your string was getting a little dry and where you remoistened it, but you remoistened it a little bit too much. Or see there, your braid is getting a little crooked. Or your string is getting a little dry, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But he never gave me more than 2-3 things. Never more.
Yeah.
Although there were pieces where he could have pointed at 50 things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think telling the truth is very important. But telling the truth does not need to be rude.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's one thing. And if somebody says flat out, guys, give it to me because I want to learn,
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to give it to him in the most polite way with a solution where I think there was a mistake, and hope the guy goes from there and is grateful for my input.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody just posts something and says nothing, or is just like how proud he is, then I don't react.
Yeah.
But that's just me.
Yeah.
That's just me. And but I know, and I mean, he doesn't even have to be one of the top honchos, but I get a lot of input from Bill.
Mm-hmm.
I get a lot of input from Clint. I remember there was one comment by Brett Heskett on a button that I did, or it was a complete project, I can't remember. But he said, you're on your way, but I feel this needs a lot more rolling and rubbing. And he got me thinking. And so I sent him a message on Messenger, and we chatted about it a little deal. And I heeded his advice. And from then on, everything I made before that looked like a freaking dog chew.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a lot of times it's and that's also at the gathering, you know. Some things you pick up that aren't even talked about. But like Pablo Lozano was tying a button, and I saw him. So he'd go like say under two. He'd push out, pull out, and he talked about how important it is. If your string is laying like this, pull like this. Don't pull here or there. So he pulled it through, but I noticed every time he took that string and laid it back and gave it a little tuck. And so the next day, I talked to him about it. And the other thing was, what he would do is he'd take his awl, like for example, yeah, this is something I cut off, but he takes his awl, he goes under two or however many strings, and he leaves it all in there. And then he makes sure he's got his string straight, then takes his awl out and just pulls, pushes the string through and then pulls it like that and folds it back. And I talked to him the last day, or maybe even the same day while we were having supper. And it helped me so much, because especially if we got some soap on our button and we're working on it, if you make the pathway for your string, you pull it out and then you get your string. That rawhide kind of wants to settle back. Where if that fit is still sitting in there and you do all that and you take that fit or that all out and you go in, it makes braiding so much easier. And it's something small that he never even thought about talking about. But for me, it made a huge difference.
When he folds it back, does it help it not want to twist?
I don't know what it does, but especially if you're tying a bomba zurda with a, let me see if I got something here that has a bomba zurda on it. Do I have something here? Not immediately, I think, but I'll just take this. Now, suppose this is a bomba zurda and you're doing it with a gaucho weave, where you come out and you go back in, right? If you just pull that a little bit back, it just wants to lay right. Does that make sense? Where if I don't do that, sometimes that one string kind of wants to travel a little bit that way or whatever. If I do that, and it's kind of like it takes care of everything else. And it's a stupid detail that for him is so natural and so self-explaining that he never even thought about explaining it. But for me, it made a huge difference. So if that makes any sense at all.
Those are the questions that I had. Do you have any extra stories or anything extra that you want to add?
Once you get long enough into it and you learn to know some people, you see a piece of gear and you recognize it immediately who made it. You know, and the longer you're in it and the better you start getting to know those guys. Like I can be in Fort Worth at the Snafflebit fraternity and walk past the booth and go from 30 feet away, go, hey, he's got a Bill Black Bozell in there, or hey, there's a Betty Frunz Bozell hanging in there, or you know. And I think if I can learn to do it, everybody can learn to do it. Do you have to have a little artistic streak? I think it gives you more possibility. But there's one thing that I might want to add that I think is very important. We have within the rawhiders gallery, we have our knot detective. If you see a button and you want to learn how to tie it,
Mm-hmm.
Mike Hickey, he can, whatever button he sees or not he sees, he can work it out.
Yeah.
The man has a talent for it.
Yeah.
Very few people have that. So for all the other mortals in the world that want to do braiding, is something that Pablo Lozano told me when we were having dinner at the gathering, is it is better to know 6 buttons but master them.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, if you know how to tie a Turk's hat
Mm-hmm.
with a cowboy interweave, let's say, regardless of whether it's a 4-bite or 6-bite or an 8 or 10 or 12, however many bites, once you know that Turk's hat, you can go build on that every time.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you tie them, the better you can make it. And the same goes for a bombazurda or one of these long buttons.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, the bombazurda, those long-term Turk's hats and the small Turk's hats, and then probably the multi-strand nose button. That's pretty much all I use.
Yeah.
You know, you can make whatever you want to make with that, and just spend as much time on your building your foundation. That's also something I learned at the gathering. If you spent the same time on building your foundation that you spend on braiding the button,
Mm-hmm.
and then about half of that time on rubbing and rolling and getting everything to be sharp, then you got a pretty damn good button. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. This was just amazing. So I feel like I'm sitting in the room with a legend. It's pretty cool for me.
No, I don't consider myself a legend. But here's what. I wish you and Ross all the luck in the world with this podcast, because I think there is an audience for it. I think there's a need for it. People get to know artisans or braiders or whatever, well, braiders in this case, better. And about when you talked about educating the public,
Mm-hmm.
I think a podcast like this is an ideal medium to educate the public. So kudos to you guys.
Well,
and
thank you.
I'm proud to be the first guest.
Yep. Yep. Thank you very much. All right.